The marketplace was a living, breathing organism, filled with life, sound, and color. The stalls were a kaleidoscope of strange fruits, exotic spices, glistening metals, and rare fabrics. Alien languages filled the air, along with the buzz of transactions and the occasional shout of a vendor trying to outdo their neighbor. The hustle and bustle of the crowd formed a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. It was a place of endless opportunity for those who fit in, for those who could blend into the fabric of the market, and for those who knew how to get what they wanted. But Azira did not fit in. Standing tall in the middle of this chaotic world, she looked out of place, impossibly large, too strong, and too different from everyone else. She was a creature of pure strength, the Arcanthian people known for their size and their power. But her stature, her imposing presence, was not something the market valued. Instead, it was a barrier, a wall that kept people away. She wasn't just large, she was too large. Too much of everything that this place didn't want. Her skin, a deep, radiant blue, seemed to glow faintly under the market's harsh overhead lights. It was beautiful in its own way, but it wasn't the look of the people who typically wandered the stalls. They were smaller, lighter in build, their features delicate and fine. Azira stood alone at the edge of the market by her stall, but it felt as though she didn't truly belong. Her towering figure was cast in shadow, and despite the occasional glance from a curious passerby, no one stopped. No one even acknowledged her presence. The market, a place built on trade and commerce, had already passed its judgment on her. She was too big, too strong, too imposing. Every now and then someone would look her way, perhaps out of curiosity or maybe just to assess her. But the judgment was always the same. The whispers followed her, not that she could hear the words, but she could feel them, in the way people would avoid eye contact or look at her only to turn away quickly. The whispers were always there. She's too much. She's a brute. No one will buy her. Her hand rested lightly on the counter of her stall, where a few small, faded relics from her past sat, items she had hoped would interest someone. There were no buyers, only those who came to glance and quickly look away. Her people, the Arcanthians, were warriors, created for battle and strength. But here in the market, her size was a curse, not a gift. Her people had been bred to survive wars, but in this peaceful corner of the galaxy, her might was seen as a danger, something that would upset the delicate balance of things. She had been in this market for days, and every day had been the same. No buyers, no interest, only rejection. The traders who came to her stall turned their noses up, muttering to each other about how her kind was too rough, too intimidating. They couldn't see beyond the strength of her body, beyond her size. What she wanted, what she had hoped for, was to find a place where her strength could be valued for what it truly was, a power that could protect, a power that could defend, a power that could change the tide of a battle or save a life. But here, in this place, she was seen as a weapon, not a person. Azira had learned long ago to keep her emotions in check, to hide the hurt that came with being overlooked, with being seen only as a tool of destruction. Yet standing there in the middle of this marketplace, surrounded by people who judged her without knowing anything about her, it became hard to keep her composure. The weight of isolation pressed down on her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. She wasn't just alone in the market. She was alone in the world. And still the crowd flowed around her like water around a rock, oblivious to her presence. She watched them with detached eyes, her broad shoulders hunched slightly as if trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. She could have left, could have walked away and never looked back. But where would she go? She had come here in search of something she hadn't been able to define. Perhaps she had been searching for acceptance, for a place where she didn't have to be defined by her size, by her strength. Maybe, just maybe, there was a place where she could be understood. But the market wasn't that place. Azira glanced at the people walking by, their laughter and chatter making the air feel even more distant, like she was in a world that wasn't made for her. She had fought in battles, seen worlds burn, but none of those battles had prepared her for this silent, invisible fight against the judgment of those who didn't understand her. Her fingers brushed the edge of a relic she had placed on the counter, a small, ornate knife she had once used in a battle long ago. She ran her thumb over the intricate carvings on the hilt, remembering the day she had won it. It had been a hard-fought battle. Zrenia, but the knife had become a symbol of her strength. To her, it was more than just a weapon. It was a part of her journey. But here, in the market, it was just another piece of useless junk, something no one would even look at twice. As the day wore on, Azira's hopes began to fade. She had been here too long, and the rejection had started to weigh on her. There had to be a place where she could use her strength for something more, something meaningful. But this market, this place, would never see that in her. It would never see her for what she truly was. Azira sighed, a heavy, defeated sound that seemed to drown in the sea of noise around her. Maybe it was time to leave, but where would she go? The thought of walking away, of leaving this place without anything to show for her journey, felt like failure. Still, she couldn't stay here forever, trapped in a world that didn't understand her. She had to find something more, somewhere she could be valued for who she was. For now, though, she would wait. Wait until the market closed, until the crowd dispersed, until she was alone once again. But this time, she wouldn't be waiting for a buyer. She would be waiting for something deeper, something that would recognize her for what she truly was. A warrior, a survivor. Not just a giant, but for today, she was just Azira, standing alone in the marketplace, hoping for a chance that seemed increasingly unlikely. Azira's large hands trembled as she gently ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the relic, the dull glow of the market's lights flickering overhead. The marketplace continued around her, its constant hum of life and commerce like a distant echo. The traders and buyers moved in a rhythm she was no longer part of. She had learned long ago to shut off the sting of rejection, to bury her pain deep inside where no one could see. But today, the ache in her chest felt unbearable. The cold weight of isolation settled over her like a thick, suffocating fog. The whispers still lingered in the air, even when they were not spoken aloud. The crowd had seen her for what she was. Too big, too much to handle. Her size had become her prison. It made her different from the others. And in this place, different was a burden. She had tried, time and time again, to prove that there was more to her than her stature. But each time, she was met with the same result. She was seen as an object, not a being. A tool, not a person. As she looked around the marketplace, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the judgment pressing down on her. No one here could possibly understand what it was like to carry this burden. To be born into a world where your worth was determined by the size of your body and the power it could wield. Azira was born an Arcanthian, a race of warriors bred for battle and strength. Her kind had once been revered as unstoppable forces, their power unmatched, but here in this market, they were just feared. Her people were tools of war, nothing more. Azira had seen the cruelty of war. She had fought in countless battles, watched as entire civilizations were destroyed, and yet, in all those years, she had never felt as helpless as she did now. Her strength, which had been a source of pride, was now a curse. It was a reminder of what others feared, of what they did not understand. Her blue skin, her towering frame, her immense power, they were all symbols of a past she couldn't escape. A past that no one in this marketplace was willing to accept. Her eyes drifted across the faces of the people passing by, each one caught in their own world, unaware of the quiet battle she was fighting. She wanted to shout, to demand that someone see her for who she truly was. But what was the point? She had tried that already. She had spoken, but no one had listened. Her words, like her strength, were dismissed as unimportant. The truth of who she was, the fierce protector, the survivor, was hidden beneath the layers of judgment that clung to her. The traders continued to ignore her, moving briskly from one potential customer to the next, their eyes glancing over her as if she were just another piece of unwanted merchandise. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as frustration bubbled inside her. She wasn't some object to be bought or sold. She wasn't just a warrior for hire. But here, in this place, that was all she seemed to be. A tool. A commodity. Azira knew she was capable of so much more than what the world had labeled her. She had fought for her people, had led them through battles, had protected them from enemies who wanted to destroy everything they stood for. She had given everything she had to her cause, to her people. And yet, here she was, standing alone in a marketplace, unseen and unwanted. Her mind wandered back to the battles she had fought, the long, grueling days spent on the front lines, surrounded by fellow warriors who had relied on her strength. They had respected her, admired her, but that respect had always been tied to her power, to her ability to fight and win. It had never been about who she was as a person, never about the spirit that burned within her. To the world, she was just a weapon, an instrument of destruction. As the market around her continued to swell with activity, Azira's thoughts turned inward, to the past, to the long road that had led her here. She had been a leader among her people, a beacon of strength, but that had come at a cost. The weight of leadership, the pressure to always be strong, had slowly eroded her sense of self. She had become what others needed her to be, not what she had wanted to be. And now, standing here in the quiet solitude of rejection, she wondered if she had lost herself along the way. She had never felt so alone. Even in the midst of a bustling crowd, she felt completely isolated. It wasn't just the physical distance. It was the emotional distance. No one here understood her. No one here could see her as more than just her size, her strength, her power. The thought that she might never find a place where she could simply exist without being judged or feared filled her with a deep, quiet despair. But then, just as quickly as the despair began to settle in, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She wasn't done. She had faced the toughest of enemies, had survived impossible odds. She would survive this too. The marketplace and the world that had rejected her might not understand her, but that didn't mean she had to accept their judgment. She refused to be defined by what others thought of her. Her journey was not over. She didn't know where it would take her next. But she knew she would find a place where she could belong, a place where she could be valued for the person she truly was. And if she had to fight for it, then so be it. With a deep breath, Azira lifted her chin, her eyes hardening with resolve. The weight of isolation was heavy, but it wasn't a burden she would carry forever. She would find her way, no matter the obstacles in her path, no matter who tried to shut her down. Azira wasn't just a weapon. She wasn't just a giant. She was so much more. And one day, someone would see that. Frankie had seen countless things in his travels across the galaxy, but nothing quite like Azira. He wasn't sure what drew him to her. Perhaps it was her size, so different from everyone else in the market, or maybe it was the quiet sadness in her eyes. It wasn't often that he found himself stopping in the middle of the chaos of a busy trading market, but this time, he did. He had been walking through the stalls, his mind on the usual mundane tasks of buying supplies, when his gaze fell on her, standing alone at her stall. It wasn't just her height that caught his attention, it was the way she held herself. She wasn't trying to fit in with the crowd, she wasn't trying to blend in with the others. Azira stood like a statue, her immense form almost out of place among the small, delicate aliens that hurried past her. The crowd seemed to move around her, as if she were invisible, as if she were an obstacle rather than a living being. Frankie knew what it was like to be overlooked. He was a simple man, a traveler, someone who didn't stand out in a crowd. But even he could see that Azira wasn't just another traveler. She was something else entirely. There was a power in her presence, a kind of quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her like an invisible aura. Yet, despite that strength, there was something in her posture, in the way she gazed off into the distance, that spoke of a loneliness Frankie knew all too well. He had walked past her at first, as the others did, eyes averted. But something held him back. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a deeper feeling, something he couldn't quite explain. He turned back, slowly, his boots scraping against the cobblestones as he made his way back toward her. He didn't know why he felt compelled to stop. He had no need for relics or strange artifacts, and the market offered him nothing of interest. But there was something about Azira that called to him. He stood there for a moment, a few feet away, watching her silently. She was so still, as though the world around her didn't matter. Her hands rested on the edge of the counter, the faintest tremor in her fingers betraying the tension she was holding in. Her blue skin, marked with scars from battles she must have fought, glowed faintly under the dim lights. Her golden hair, though messy and unkempt, was still beautiful, spilling down over her shoulders. Frankie cleared his throat, unsure of what to say. "You're not having much luck, are you?" Azira didn't react at first. Her gaze didn't even shift toward him. She had grown used to being ignored, to being dismissed as if she were invisible. But his voice was different. It wasn't filled with the usual pity, nor was it laced with fear or condescension. The quiet between them stretched, the distant noise of the market fading as the world seemed to shrink into just the two of them. Azira, for the first time since arriving at the market, didn't feel like an outcast. The heavy weight of isolation had begun to lift, replaced by something unfamiliar, the soft pull of connection. She had never been good at trusting others, had always assumed people saw her only for what she represented, the power in her arms, the destructive force in her heart. But Frankie wasn't looking at her like that. He wasn't afraid, nor was he pitying her. He simply saw her. And that, in itself, was a rarity in Azira's world. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Azira's amber eyes studied Frankie, watching the gentle sincerity in his gaze. It was the first time anyone had met her eyes with such clarity, with such genuine interest, rather than averting their gaze or sizing her up like an obstacle. Frankie shifted his weight slightly, looking at her as if he was waiting for her to say something, anything. The silence grew thicker, but he didn't seem uncomfortable. He just waited, patient and calm. Azira finally broke the silence, her voice quieter now, as if she was letting herself be vulnerable for the first time in ages. "You don't fear me?" Frankie's eyebrows furrowed as he processed her question. He had expected something more defensive, perhaps an accusation. But instead, it was an inquiry, one that seemed to come from deep within her. He smiled softly, his voice carrying the warmth of understanding. "No, I don't fear you, Azira. You're not just strength. You're more than that." Her lips parted, as if to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She wasn't used to hearing such things. No one had ever said she was more than her power. In her world, she was known for her size, her strength, her ability to destroy. Yet, here in front of this man who had no reason to be anything but cautious, he was telling her that she was more. More than just a warrior, more than just an object. For a long time, Azira had been at war with herself. She had fought in countless battles, led armies, and survived unimaginable horrors. Yet the one battle she had never been able to win was the one against the fear and self-doubt that lurked within her. Being seen only as a weapon had always felt like a prison. She had been used, discarded, and judged for the very thing that made her strong. She had never known any other way to exist. But Frankie, he made her feel like she was worth something more. "You don't know what they've said about me," Azira said softly, her eyes searching his. "What they think of me. They see me as a threat, a tool, something to be feared." Frankie shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "I've heard the whispers, Azira, but I don't care about what they say. I care about who you are, not who they want you to be." The words hit her like a tidal wave, sweeping away the walls she had carefully constructed around herself. The walls that had kept her isolated, the walls that had allowed her to survive without letting anyone get close. For a fleeting moment, Azira felt the weight of her own humanity. She had always been so focused on her strength, on what others wanted her to be, that she had forgotten what it meant to simply be herself. She swallowed hard, trying to steady the rush of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm her. She had lived so long in the shadows of judgment, never daring to hope for something different. But now, in this quiet moment with Frankie, she could almost believe that there was more for her. A future where she wasn't defined by her size, her scars, or her power. A future where she could belong. "I'm not like them," Azira said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the vulnerability she so desperately tried to hide. "I don't want to be just a weapon. I don't want to fight anymore. I want—" She paused, not entirely sure how to finish the thought. "I want to be more than this." Frankie took a small step forward, his presence grounding her in a way she didn't expect. "You already are," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "You're more than what they see, Azira, and you're more than what you think of yourself." Azira's chest tightened, the words sinking in like soft rain on dry soil. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that, not in the way that made her feel like she mattered. The feeling was foreign, and yet it felt like the most real thing she had experienced in her entire life. For the first time in a long time, Azira felt a flicker of something new. Hope. Not the kind of hope born from desperation, but the kind that came from recognizing a possibility. A possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could be something different. Something more. The soft, distant hum of the market slowly came back to her, but the world around them had changed. In that small, quiet moment between Azira and Frankie, something had shifted. The market continued around them, as if oblivious to the quiet transformation taking place at the edge of the bustling chaos. The merchants shouted louder. The foot traffic swirled in every direction, but for Azira and Frankie, everything seemed to slow down. The harsh judgment of the crowd, the dismissive gazes, the muttered words, they were all distant now, fading into the background like a bad dream. In this small, secluded corner, Frankie and Azira shared something neither of them had expected. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment of quiet connection, of understanding that neither of them had anticipated. Frankie stood a few steps away from Azira, his hands tucked into his pockets as he looked at her thoughtfully. His expression was serious, his brow furrowed as if contemplating something deep within. Azira, for the first time since meeting him, didn't feel the weight of his gaze as something invasive. She didn't feel exposed or judged. She felt heard. "So," Frankie broke the silence, his voice quieter now, but with a firmness that caught her attention. "You said you didn't want to be just a weapon, that you didn't want to fight anymore. But tell me, Azira, what if you didn't have to fight? What if you could choose your own path? What if you didn't have to live under the weight of everyone else's expectations?" Azira's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to understand, to get it. to see beyond the surface of her scars, her size, her power, and offer her something different. His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Azira felt a spark of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. It was a strange feeling, almost like freedom, but it didn't come with the typical rush of exhilaration. It came slowly, cautiously, like a soft whisper that dared her to believe in it. "I don't know if I can choose a path that doesn't involve battle," Azira replied, her voice almost uncertain, as though she was still weighing her options. "I've spent my whole life being something I never asked to be, a weapon, a soldier. That's all anyone's ever seen me as. That's all I've ever known." Frankie nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "But that's not all you are, Azira. I can see it in you. You're more than your past. You're more than your power. You're you, and I don't think that should be wasted. I think you deserve a life where you're valued for who you are, not just for what you can do." Azira felt a flicker of something in her chest. It was hope. She had never allowed herself to hope like this, not in a long time. Her world had been one of survival, of fighting for survival, and she had learned to believe that was all she would ever know. She didn't know what this man was offering, but it felt like more than what she had come to expect from the world. "But what do you want from me?" Azira's voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't want to sound desperate, but she had to ask. She had been used so many times before, her body and strength exploited for others' gain. This, whatever this was between them, felt too good to be true. She had to know if there was something more behind his kindness. Frankie's expression shifted, becoming more determined. "I want you to have a choice, Azira. I don't want to see you continue to be treated like a tool. I don't want to see you struggle under the weight of others' expectations. I want you to have a chance at something better." His eyes met hers, and there was no hesitation, no doubt in his words. "I want to give you that chance." Azira's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of possibility. She had never imagined that someone would want to offer her anything, let alone a choice. Her life had always been defined by others, by battles fought and wars won. But now, with Frankie standing before her, offering her something different, something peaceful, she felt the faintest stirrings of hope. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was something she hadn't felt in years. Frankie took another step closer, his voice growing more earnest. "I want to buy your freedom, Azira. Not to own you or control you, but to give you the option to choose for yourself. I want to offer you a life where you can decide what to do, where you can be valued for your heart and your strength, not just your ability to fight." Azira's eyes widened as she took in his words. Buy her freedom? The concept felt foreign to her. She had never thought of herself as someone who could be free, someone who could make choices beyond the battlefield. She had never imagined that anyone would want to take her away from this life of rejection and fear. But here he was, Frankie, offering her just that. A life where she wasn't defined by the weight of others' perceptions. A life where her size, her strength, her past didn't have to be the sum of who she was. It was a life she had never dared to dream of, but now, in this moment, it was within reach. I don't know how to thank you, Azira said, her voice thick with emotion. She had never thought she would be standing here, in this place, with someone who actually saw her, not just as a warrior, not just as a weapon, but as something more, someone who could offer her a future, a new beginning. You don't have to thank me, Frankie said, his tone gentle but firm. This isn't about gratitude. This is about giving you what you deserve, a chance. Azira's heart was racing. She had lived her entire life waiting for permission to be more than what she was, a warrior, a tool. But now Frankie had given her that permission. He had opened a door she had never thought existed. It terrified her, but it also felt like the most liberating thing she had ever heard. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice steady but full of uncertainty. "I don't know where it will lead, but I'll go with you. For once, I want to see where my own path might take me." Frankie smiled, a soft, genuine smile that filled Azira's chest with warmth. "Then let's walk it together," he said, offering her his hand. Azira hesitated for just a moment before reaching out, taking his hand in her own. It was warm and steady, and as she clasped it, she felt a surge of something deep within her, hope, courage, and the smallest flicker of freedom. For the first time in her life, Azira wasn't alone. And that was the beginning of something new. Azira sat still, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, as Frankie's words echoed in her mind. It felt unreal, a life where she was free, where she could choose her own path. She had never imagined such a thing was possible. Her entire existence had been dictated by the rules of war, by the strength that her body demanded, by the fear that others had of her. For years, she had been defined by what she could do, not by who she was. She was a weapon, a tool, not a person. Now, standing here in this crowded marketplace, it seemed that her world was shifting in a way she had never allowed herself to believe. Frankie had offered her more than just a chance to escape this place. He had given her something she had long ago thought was impossible, a choice. But with that choice came uncertainty. The weight of it hung heavily on her. She had lived her whole life in one direction, and now she was being asked to turn and face an entirely new world. It was terrifying. She wasn't sure she even knew how to live in that world, to exist without the constant shadow of conflict and violence. Would she be able to find peace? Could she truly leave everything she had known behind? Her eyes wandered across the busy market, the stalls, the people haggling over goods, laughing, trading. It was a world she had never been part of. She had always watched from the sidelines, a stranger in a world that didn't have a place for her. The thought of walking away from this place, from everything that had been her life for so long, filled her with a strange mix of relief and fear. And then, there was Frankie. He was standing there, waiting for her, offering her something she had never asked for, freedom. He had recognized her strength and her worth, not for what she could do, but for who she was. The sincerity in his eyes, the calm assurance in his voice, it was like a lifeline. She felt like she could trust him, even though she had never trusted anyone else before. He saw her as a person, not a weapon. That alone made his offer different from everything else she had ever known. Azira inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill her lungs as she glanced back at Frankie. He was still watching her, patiently waiting, his expression open and understanding. He hadn't pushed her, hadn't rushed her decision. He had simply given her the space to make it for herself. That was something no one had ever done for her. "I've never had a choice before," Azira said, her voice low, the words coming from a place deep within her, a place that had been buried for so long. "I've only ever had one purpose, one role in this world." She looked down at her hands, her massive palms, the scars from past battles etched into her skin. To fight, to be strong, to destroy. She swallowed hard, the weight of those words pressing down on her chest. "But I don't know if I can be anything else. I don't know if I can live without that." Frankie took a small step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to stop being strong, Azira. You don't have to stop fighting for what's right. But you also don't have to be defined by it anymore. You're more than just your power. You're more than just your past. You're a person who deserves to choose how to live." His words reached her in a way nothing else had. She had always believed that her strength was her only value, that it was the only thing that kept her alive, kept her from being swallowed whole by the world. But Frankie was showing her that there was another way to live. a way where she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders every day. She could still be strong, still be a warrior, but on her own terms, for her own reasons. Azira closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything she had known slip away, if only for a second. The future stretched out before her, uncertain and unknown, but it was hers. She didn't have to keep fighting for a cause that didn't honor her. She didn't have to keep running from the fear and the rejection. For the first time in her life, she could choose what came next. "Okay," Azira said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go with you." The words came more easily than she had expected, as though something inside her had finally clicked into place. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know exactly where the road would lead her. What mattered was that she was choosing to take it, and for the first time in years, it felt right. Frankie smiled, his face lighting up with relief and warmth. It wasn't a triumphant smile, but one of understanding, of shared resolve. He reached out, his hand extended in a simple gesture of trust. Azira hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to take it. His grip was steady, strong, but gentle, just as his words had been. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel for so long. For the first time, she felt like she was making a choice that was hers to make, and that, more than anything, was the most powerful thing of all. "Let's go, then," Frankie said, his voice soft but full of promise. Azira nodded, her heart a little lighter, her steps a little steadier. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. Not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as herself. And that, in itself, was enough to start a new chapter. Azira had never known peace, not in the way that Frankie seemed to understand it. To her, peace had always been a distant concept, something unattainable, something that only the weak could afford. She had fought for so long, led wars, and carried burdens heavier than anyone could imagine, and through it all she had been taught to view the world as something to conquer, something to survive. But now, walking beside Frankie, the world felt different. The road ahead was no longer a battlefield. It was just a road. The air seemed fresher, the sky bluer, the possibilities clearer. As they left the market behind, Frankie led the way through the streets, his steps light and confident. Azira followed him, her steps steady but heavy with contemplation. She didn't know what lay ahead. They were headed into the unknown, far from the chaos of the marketplace. But it wasn't the uncertainty that weighed on her. It was the weight of what she was leaving behind, the life she had known for so long. It was hard to just walk away from it, from the only life she had ever truly known. Yet every step she took beside Frankie felt like a small act of rebellion against the life that had tried to define her. For the first time, she was choosing her own path. The air outside the market was thick with the scent of fresh grass, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, and the soft sounds of nature that surrounded them. It was a stark contrast to the constant hum of the market, the noise that had filled her ears for so long. The landscape was quiet, too quiet perhaps, but there was a sense of freedom in that silence, a chance for her to breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on her chest. They reached the edge of the city, where the streets gave way to fields and open land. Frankie paused, looking back at her. His smile was small but genuine, and he gestured toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip behind the distant hills. "Do you see that?" Frankie asked, pointing toward the horizon. "That's your future, Azira. A world where you can decide what comes next. It's all out there for you, waiting." Azira looked out at the horizon, her amber eyes softening as she took in the view. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of her past on her shoulders. There were no wars to fight, no battles to win. There was just the open road ahead of her. It was almost too much to process, Too much freedom, too much possibility. She didn't know how to navigate it, didn't know where to begin. But with Frankie by her side, she felt like she could start somewhere, anywhere. She looked back at him, her expression a mix of wonder and uncertainty. I've never had a future like this, a chance to choose for myself. What if I don't know what to do with it? Frankie's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. The future isn't something you have to know in advance. It's about living in the moment, making choices along the way. And no matter what, you'll always have a choice. And no matter what, you'll always have a choice. You'll never be trapped again. Azira nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She could feel the truth of them deep in her bones. For the first time, she realized how much of her life had been dictated by others, by circumstances, by expectations, by the unrelenting demands of the people around her. She had never had the chance to ask herself what she truly wanted. Now, standing here with Frankie, she felt like she could finally begin to do that. The weight of those years of fighting, of being used as a weapon, had not disappeared entirely, but it had begun to lift, slowly, piece by piece. As they continued walking, the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the landscape with shades of gold and pink. The world was quiet now, peaceful. Azira didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words. There was something comforting about just being in this moment, walking beside someone who believed in her. Not for her strength, not for what she could do, but for who she was. She was no longer just a warrior. She was more than that, and Frankie was the first person to see it. They came upon a small campfire, tucked away in a secluded grove, and Frankie motioned for them to stop. "This will be home for the night," he said. "We'll rest, gather our thoughts, and move on in the morning." Azira sat down by the fire, her back against a rock. She watched as Frankie busied himself preparing a simple meal, his movements casual and easy. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't pushing her. He was giving her space, letting her breathe. As the flames flickered, casting warm light over the two of them, Azira finally allowed herself to relax. The tension that had been in her muscles for years, the constant readiness to fight, began to melt away. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And for the first time in a long time, she realized that she didn't have to do everything on her own. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world by herself. Frankie was here, offering her something that had always been out of reach: partnership, equality, respect, and above all, the freedom to choose what came next. For the first time in years, Azira felt like she had a future, one that was hers to define. The road ahead might be uncertain, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. With Frankie by her side, she could face whatever came, knowing that she was no longer bound by the chains of her past. And that, she realized, was the true power she had been searching for all along. The fire crackled softly, the warmth of the flames enveloping Azira and Frankie as they sat side by side in the quiet moonlit grove. The night had settled in around them, the stars shimmering like distant beacons of possibility above. The silence between them was no longer heavy or awkward. It was comfortable, like the world had slowed just for this moment, allowing them to simply be. No fighting, no expectations, just two souls, resting in the peace they had both longed for. Azira gazed at the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker, her mind wandering to everything that had brought her here. She had never allowed herself to feel this kind of peace before. Every part of her life had been a struggle, fighting, surviving, running. But now, with Frankie at her side, she could see that there was so much more to her existence than the battles she had fought. The true fight was not about strength or power. It was about learning to embrace who she was beyond what others saw in her. "Frankie," Azira said, breaking the silence, her voice soft but steady. "I've been running for so long. Running from what I am. running from the world that saw me as nothing more than a weapon. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to live without constantly fighting. Frankie looked at her, his expression gentle. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited, his presence a quiet reassurance that she was free to say whatever she needed. Azira continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. But I realize now that I've been hiding from myself, hiding from the strength I've always carried, but in a way that only hurt me. I've been running from my own power, and I don't want to do that anymore. Frankie smiled, his eyes lighting up with a mix of pride and understanding. That's the first step, Azira. You don't have to hide anymore. You've been carrying that power your whole life. It's part of who you are. And now, you get to decide how to use it. You don't need to be defined by your past, by the battles you've fought. You are more than that. Azira took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling into her chest like a comforting weight. For so long, she had believed that her power was something to be feared, something to control. She had used it to survive, to protect herself, but never once had she considered that it could be something more. Her power could build, not destroy. It could protect, not hurt. She didn't need to fight the world anymore. She could choose how to shape it. The fire crackled louder, the sound filling the space between them. Azira stood up, her body a silhouette against the glow of the flames. She looked up at the sky, the stars now seeming to shine a little brighter, a little clearer, as if in response to her new sense of self. I've always believed that my strength was a burden, Azira said, her voice quiet but firm. But now I see that it's a gift. It's a part of me, and I'm not going to hide from it anymore. Frankie stood up beside her, his presence solid and steady. I never thought of you as a burden, Azira, he said softly. I saw the strength in you from the beginning, but I also saw something else. A heart, a spirit, something far more powerful than anything physical. You're not just a warrior, Azira, you're a person, and you have the ability to choose how you use your power. You always did. Azira's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time in her life, she felt seen for who she truly was, not just for what she could do. The weight of the world that had once defined her began to melt away. She wasn't a tool to be used, a weapon to be feared. She was Azira, a woman with a future, with choices, with the power to shape her own path. She looked back at Frankie, her expression softening. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion, for seeing me, for believing in me when no one else did. Frankie smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. You don't need to thank me, Azira. You've always had that strength. I just helped you find it. Azira turned back toward the fire, the light dancing across her features as she looked out at the path ahead. The future stretched out before her, unknown but full of possibilities. She could feel the fire of her own spirit rising within her, fueling her with the confidence to face whatever lay ahead. She wasn't defined by her past anymore. She wasn't a soldier, a weapon, or an outcast. She was Azira, and that was enough. She turned to Frankie, her gaze steady. We've got a long road ahead of us, she said, her voice filled with determination. But I'm ready for it, ready to choose my future. Frankie nodded, his expression unwavering. Then let's walk it together. With that, they stood side by side, the fire crackling behind them as they looked out toward the horizon, ready for whatever came next. Azira had embraced her true power, and with that, she had found her place in the world, not as a weapon, but as a force for something greater.